Thank you, Your Honor. Your strong words and relevant message. The liberation 75 years ago, in January, in Poland, and in the following months in the neighboring countries, brought an end to World War II, but obviously was not the end of the story of the Holocaust. Like every other Jewish community in the world, the lives of the survivors, the memories of those who perished, are the limbs and the bones of our community here in The Hague as well. One of the prominent members of our community was Mr. Solomon Salik Sznaj, a Lemberger, a child of the city, which Professor Sands very convincingly argues had a tremendous impact on the development of international law. Mr. Arie Sznaj will now share with us the very personal life story of his father and his family.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My father, Solomon Salik Sznaj, was born in 1929 in Lemberg, Lvov. And he survived the persecutions of the Second World War there, inside the city. He didn't speak much about his experiences during the war, only if you asked him. But the events influenced his life profoundly. The fears of the period and his wondering why he survived when so many perished stayed with him all his life. Let me share his story with you. In the 1930s, Lvov was a multi-ethnic city of 350,000 in the southeast of Poland, with a large minority of Jews, probably a third of the population. My family comes from a religious Hasidic background. My grandfather, Moshe Sznaj, adhered to Jewish tradition, but was clean-shaven and wore modern-style suits. He was a successful trader in silverware and silver coins and lived with his family in a middle-class neighborhood. My father attended the modern Hebrew gymnasium of the Zionist movement, I must admit, much to the annoyance of my Hasidic great-grandfathers. September 1939, the Second World War breaks out, and the city is occupied by Russia as part of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The main change for my father was that under communist rule, no expressions of religion were allowed, no more Hebrew, and there was now school on the Holy Sabbath day. Then came Yom Kippur in 1940, Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish year. And the communists announced that absence from school would be severely punished. And so my father had a perfectly healthy tooth extracted just to have a note from the dentist and a plausible reason not to attend school. At the end of June 1941, Germany attacked Russia and enters Lvov a few days later. Jews are fired from their jobs. Radios, anything with fur and other valuables are confiscated. Jews are forced to wear a white band on their arm with a blue star. Soon, houses in the best neighborhoods are confiscated for Germans and Volksdeutsche, and evicted tenants are allotted apartments belonging to Jewish families. And so, in September 1941, a Ukrainian dentist knocks on the door of my family's apartment, showing a document which says that the apartment has been allotted to him. They have 24 hours to leave. The family moves in with grandparents Sznaj in the Jewish neighborhood that later became part of the ghetto. The move there was dangerous. The sole entrance that the Germans had left to enter this quarter was to go under a bridge. And there they picked out any Jews who had particular traits: elderly people, cripples, red-haired people. Some 8,000 to 10,000 were picked out, never to be seen again. In the ghetto, my grandfather joined the work brigade at the train yard, loading and unloading trains for the German army. This provided him a valuable certificate as a Wehrmachtarbeiter that gave protection from transportation to both him and his wife, who was a Haushälterin for Wehrmachtarbeiter. But it left the children exposed and at risk. In the summer of 1942, there are in Lvov still some 80,000 Jews, as the big August Action starts. The same action in which Professor Sands lost many of his relatives. German troops, together with Ukrainian auxiliary police forces, go from home to home and round up anyone considered dispensable. Some 45 to 50,000 Jews were murdered in this action, most of them in the nearby extermination camp Belzec. During this action, my father had two very close escapes. The first time, the Nazis raided the building, came to the apartment, took away all the inhabitants of the front room of the apartment, a widow with her teenage daughter, and a young married Hasidic couple with their baby. My father, until his last days, would wonder why the Germans just did not open the door to the back room where his mother, he, and his sister stayed. The second event happened a few days later, when a German soldier, together with an officer of the Ukrainian auxiliary police forces, entered the apartment. My father and his sister were hidden in the toilet, with a large bookcase covering the door. It was just bad luck that a German soldier needed to make use of the toilet. And soon the children were discovered. My aunt, 9 years old, with blue eyes and blonde curls, pleaded with them, "Please, don't take us away, let us stay." And in the meantime, my grandmother uncovered a blanket to show some dollar bills that were spread out on the bed, spread out to make it look like a bigger sum. This was actually a risky act, as bribery was punishable by death. The German and the Ukrainian exchanged looks, didn't say a word, and left. The Ukrainian police officer returned some hours later to claim the money. He promised protection, and later my father indeed overheard him calling outside that the building was empty and ordering troops to move on. But at the same time, from the window, my father saw him killing people in the street with his gun. In the meantime, my grandfather had an acquaintance, a Polish, non-Jewish black marketeer named Ducheminski. My grandfather convinced him to help to save the children. The ghetto was gradually being closed off, being fenced. But Ducheminski knew his way in and out and took my grandmother and the two children to his apartment. There they stayed for 6 months in a small storage room with one bed, keeping quiet during the day when the apartment was supposed to be empty. Then, one day, Ducheminski rushed in. "You have to leave immediately." It turned out he had helped another Jew who lived freely outside of the ghetto on false papers. But unfortunately, this person was shot during a robbery and rushed off to hospital. It was just a matter of time before they would reveal his Jewish identity, and the trail would lead to Ducheminski. My father's sister stayed behind, hidden for some days in a stove, but my father and grandmother found themselves in the street with nowhere to go. After hiding for 2 weeks with the caretaker of their original apartment, my grandfather, together with Ducheminski, found them a place to hide, with a gentleman named Rzepka. Rzepka was also a caretaker of a building, and he was a drunkard, whose salary didn't cover his bills at the local cafe. And in order to finance his drinking habits, he was willing to take the risk. Now, Rzepka was also a handyman, and he built a wall to close off the small space under the stairs leading to the cellar of the building. The bottom steps could be removed, so you could crawl in. And it is there that my father and his parents spent 15 months until Lvov was liberated by the Red Army at the end of July 1944. The space was cramped. You couldn't stand upright, and 3 persons couldn't lay flat on their back. Rzepka, who had to explain why he went down to the cellar so often, explained to other residents of the building that he kept rabbits in the cellar. So you can imagine what they ate. When they came out eventually, filthy and famished, my father had to learn how to walk again and wore green glasses against the sunlight. Rzepka asked him to leave at night, in the dark, and never come back. He was ashamed he had saved Jews. My father's sister, in the meantime, had been living with 2 single ladies, teachers, and after the liberation, the family was united again. Of the 110,000, 120,000 Jews of Lvov, just a few hundred came out of hiding. Also in the weeks after the liberation, with Jews returning from other places, the rate of survival remained only a few percent. A family with both children surviving was a rarity. We were the lucky ones. But I remember, as a child, waking up at night because my father's nightmares. My family picked up life, never abandoning our Jewish tradition. And I would like to share with you a Jewish insight. In the Genesis story of creation, God is quoted, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." The Jewish sages, with keen sense for grammar and detail, asked, who is this us? Why the plural language? And they gave a homiletical explanation that God consulted with the angels whether to create man or not. And of course, an argument followed between the 2 camps of angels, each representing divine characteristics of God that man should emulate. Those in favor of creation of man claimed that man, like God, would do acts of loving kindness and be righteous. The opposition, that represented God's attributes of truth and peace, claimed that man would be all lies and scam and would only cause strife and war. Eventually, God reached a decision and created man, expressing hope and trust in mankind. Modern history has put God's decision to the test. It's up to all of us, and in particular the international law community, to prove him right.